Hello, welcome to this Hoop Collective short. Joining me is Tim Bontemps.
Hello, Brian.
Timothy. And joining me also is another Tim, Van MacMahon.
Howdy, partners.
So, guys, today the trade deadline's coming up, and I thought we would take a look back at the last, when we could go all the way back, but at some point, it kind of gets a little bizarre. So I thought we'd take a look all the way back to the year 2000. And all the trade deadline day deals and kind of go over the best ones. Now, deadline day is a relative term. So, sometimes there's been some big deals made like a day before the deadline or a week before the deadline. But I meant actual on the deadline day. And the reason these are interesting is because these are often deals that, like, whether it was pressure or there was like drama, do we get it done or whatever. And so I thought we'd go back and, like, guys, deadline day didn't always used to be such a big deal. It's become a much bigger deal in like the last 7 or 8 years. But if you go back to 2000, you know how many trades there were on deadline day? One trade on deadline day in 2000, Anthony Johnson getting traded for a conditional second round draft pick. Isn't that exciting?
That changed the league.
There were other years where there was like only 1 or 2 trades. So it's more of a modern phenomenon, which is why we're not going like way, way back. But I thought we'd look at some of the ones that I thought were some of the biggest trades. And so last year there were, like 15 or 18 trades involving like 35 or 40 players. But the one that was the biggest last year, in my view, was Aaron Gordon going to the Nuggets. For RJ Hampton, Gary Harris, and a future first-round draft pick to the Magic. The Nuggets were great in the days after this trade, and then unfortunately Jamal Murray got hurt in March last year, and maybe it was in April, and that just derailed them. And then Aaron Gordon signed a $90 million extension this last summer. That was a big one, and one of the ones that potentially could have made a difference on the playoffs had Murray not got hurt, Bontemps. But really, looking back over the last 5 years, even though it was just a year ago, that was one of the bigger ones.
Yeah, I have 2 that stand out to me from the past few years. One is in 2019 when the Memphis Grizzlies traded Marc Gasol to the eventual NBA champion Toronto Raptors. Marc had his ups and downs offensively in the playoffs, but was a linchpin for them defensively, particularly against Joel Embiid in that slugfest series in the second round against Philly that they escaped when that three-pointer from Kawhi hit the rim 9,000 times before falling through. But he gave them a real presence defensively and some, veteran playoff experience, a little bit of a different look than Jonas Valanciunas. That really was a huge part of why Toronto went on to win that title. And then in 2020, there was a certain trade.
This one. This is a big one.
Between the Timberwolves and the Warriors, a trade that Brian Windhorst at the time was a big proponent of for the Minnesota Timberwolves.
No, that's not true. That's not true. I didn't like it for the Warriors. I didn't like it. I wasn't about. I was not.
Brian
Windhorst. Pull some tape.
Okay,
we're gonna have to
all
pull
right,
some
then
tape.
I'll rephrase. Brian Windhorst thought it was a bad trade for the Golden State Warriors at the time. That's fair.
Let me just frame this. Remember, to get D'Angelo Russell, they had to trade a first-round pick to Memphis.
We're doing a lot of contortions.
No, just
like John Moran driving in traffic.
They had to trade a first-round pick to Memphis, which they still haven't given away yet.
That is correct.
To get off of Iguodala.
That is correct.
To get Kevin Durant to agree to a sign and trade for D'Angelo Russell, who they didn't even want. They had to trade a first-round pick to Brooklyn. Now, the way it worked out, that pick didn't convey.
That is correct.
But they sent 2 first-round picks out just to get D'Angelo Russell.
That is correct.
They never wanted. They only got so they could trade him.
That might have been a horrible decision to trade for D'Angelo Russell in foreshadowing for what's about to come in a second here.
Right. And then they took on Andrew Wiggins in this deal. And for a pick that had some protection on it. It ended up falling beautifully into the number 2 pick, which I didn't know.
No, I thought it was the Kuminga pick.
Yes.
The 2 was their own. Yeah, the 2 was their own. They stunk so bad they got 2 and didn't take LaMelo Ball.
It ended up falling beautifully into the number 7 pick, and Wiggins has turned into an all-star starter. But nobody,
including
the Warriors, thought he was going to be an all-star starter when they traded for him.
No, but
and he shouldn't have been, but he has been a very good player whose his contract is not a problem.
My view was trading 2 first-round picks and taking on Andrew Wiggins wasn't worth getting a pick that was protected.
So you didn't like the deal before. You didn't like the deal before the deal.
Brian didn't like the Warriors trading for Andrew Wiggins. That's what he didn't like. And he ignored the fact that I
didn't like them trading for D'Angelo Russell.
I thought they would just. But you thought that the Warriors trade. I'm not putting your words in your mouth. You thought at the time the Warriors did not make a good trade in that deal.
I'm actually looking at it,
and it turned out that they made a great trade because D'Angelo Russell, who we 100% agree they should never have traded for in the first place. That was a disastrous move. And just like imagine where Golden State would be if they didn't make that trade.
It doesn't matter.
Things would be totally
because
different.
I was wrong. And it was a good deadline day trade. It doesn't matter. Okay.
I'm looking at another trade from that year that is 6 degrees of separation from this one. And that is the Grizzlies trading Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder, and Solomon Hill to the Heat to get Justice Winslow was supposed to be the prize of that deal.
Supposed to be.
Took back a ton of salary. The Heat managed to dump Dion Waiters, who was owed the next year, managed to dump James Johnson, who got rerouted to Minnesota. But the Heat dumped a ton of salary. And Jay Crowder ended up being a really, really critical part of their run to the finals.
He shot 7,000% from 3 in the bubble.
Yeah, and went on and earned a full mid-level deal from Phoenix, where he's been a big part of their run to the finals last year, and then being in first place. That was a deal though for the Heat that, and it's the one miss that Zach Kleiman's made as the Grizzlies general manager. He bet on Justice Winslow, fellow Duke alum, and it did not work out for him. But he was in some ways he was just kind of playing with house money because. They're still getting the 2024 pick from Iguodala. Remember, that's the year where there was all free Iggy. It's like, well, no, we're gonna trade him. He ain't gonna come here and play. That's fine. Although the Grizzlies locker room didn't like it,
right?
But they held him as a chip, and they ended up trading him. But man, what a great deal for the Heat, getting some very valuable veteran role players and getting off that much salary and creating some flexibility that. I think if you trace it indirectly, has allowed them to do something like add Kyle Lowry this year.
Well, and I was just giving Brian a hard time about that other deal, but it is wild to think about where the Warriors would be if they were not able to pull that trade off and they were just stuck with D'Angelo Russell on this team. Like things would look totally different for them compared to where
they would have gotten rid of him in another deal that probably wouldn't have been as good. Okay, so now we're going to go back a little bit. There was a couple of deals on trade deadline day 2015. If you guys can get excited about anything that happened in 16, 17, and 18, God bless you, which is another reason why we make much ado about nothing most of the time on deadline day trades. But okay, 2015 deadline day, which was a crazy day. A lot happened on deadline day 2015. Really,
half the point guards in the league got traded that day.
That's right. That deadline sort of ushered in the new era of deadline day madness, really, in my view. 2 of the deals that happened on that day that, legacy wise turned out to be remarkable. One, and this one I think happened at 2 minutes before the deadline.
Yep.
The Suns traded Isaiah Thomas to the Celtics for Marcus Thornton and a first-round pick. Isaiah Thomas ended up having a 2-year magical run for the Celtics.
Yep.
Carried the Celtics into their transition to Kyrie Irving. That didn't end up working out, but allowed them to raise Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum from puppies and carried them, helped. I mean, the one postseason he had in 2017 in the wake of his sister's terrible death in an accident.
It's incredible.
It's in Celtics history is pretty crazy. So it's hard to put it in, but certainly in the last decade, one of the more remarkable things that's happened for the Celtics.
It's awesome. It was super fun.
And still, Isaiah Thomas probably still doesn't have to buy
No, he does not. I can promise you. He's still loved in Boston for sure.
That was a deadline.
He ain't buying any lobster rolls for the rest of his life.
And then another trade that happened that day and this was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 player trade with the Suns, the Heat, and the Pelicans. Goran Dragic to the Heat with his brother Zoran. But there's a whole bunch of players involved. Everybody from Danny Granger to Sean Williams to John Salmons. That deal, 2 first-round picks basically went to Phoenix in that deal. That helped the Heat, get past the devastating loss of Chris Bosh. It transitioned them and helped them stay as a relevant team.
Well, the crazy thing is they traded for him to play with Chris Bosh, and then he never played.
Yes.
They thought they had a chance to win a championship that year, and then Chris just never came back.
Within days of that trade, Chris had his second bout of blood clots and never came back. But that was a huge trade that, Goran ended up becoming an all-star with the Heat.
Yep.
And the Suns went from having all the point guards to Eric Bledsoe sitting in a beauty salon.
That's right. They traded away Isaiah Thomas. Both.
I don't want to be here.
As an indication of what happened, where the Suns used to be. They were at the wrong end of both of these deadline day trades, and now they're regarded as one of the better organizations in the league.
Well, they're after you get past the owner.
Fair. All right.
Let's not give him much shine. Come on.
There's one other deal at least we got to talk about.
Well, I got a couple more here. 2011, 2 trades happened on deadline day.
You skipped one.
Go ahead.
2012.
Okay.
Brooklyn Nets, then New Jersey Nets trade for Gerald Wallace.
I thought that was 2011.
No,
I thought that was 2011.
2011-12 season. My first year covering the NBA.
Okay. Well,
Billy King and the Nets trade a top 3 protected first round pick because, as Billy King said, there were 3 players they liked in the draft. 2 to the Portland Trailblazers for Gerald Wallace, who they then overpaid in the offseason in a move to go back to what we talked about on the pod.
It ended up being the number
8th seed in the East. They did not make the playoffs.
Ended up being the number 6 pick. Who was taking
Portland
number
Trailblazers
6?
Selected letter O, Damian Lillard. Did not work out so great for the Nets. Imagine if Damian Lillard had been in Brooklyn the last 10 years, things would look a lot different. Instead, he's applying his trade in Portland. One of the greatest deadline day trades of all time on the one side, one of the worst on the other side.
I blame Bobby Marks. Faux show.
It's also just a reminder that chasing the 8th seed is generally not a good idea.
Okay, so 2011, the year before
the lockout,
the trade that began the Cavs' march toward the 2016 title. In 2011, they are in the midst of a 27-game losing streak, or no, 20 something game losing streak.
It was a lot of losses.
A whole bunch.
It was a lot of losses.
Winning streak was 27 with LeBron. Second, I think it was 26-game losing streak. At the time, the second longest losing streak, I think, of all time. I don't know, whatever it was. They trade Mo Williams and Jamario Moon in a cash dump for Baron Davis, who they later amnestied. But they get the Clippers 2011 unprotected first-round pick. Now, this trade would never happen today because the Clippers were in lottery position at that time. There would always be protection on a trade like this when it was in season. Now, we see future picks unprotected traded because teams feel like we're not going to be bad in 2028. But this one was traded in February for a team that was lottery bound, and they left it unprotected. And what happened, Bontemps?
The Cavs won the lottery with that pick and selected a certain guy who is not vaccinated.
Kyrie Irving.
That's right.
Was picked with a pick that was traded unprotected that year. We've seen that come to fruition. We saw it later happen with the Celtics having an unprotected pick with the Nets that won the lottery.
I mean, you could do some fun what if stuff there. Like if the Clippers keep that pick and win the lottery, then they've got Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, or not Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. They got Kyrie Irving and Blake Griffin. They're probably not trading for Chris Paul.
Or if they just protect it through one or
Sure.
three.
Right. Either
Right.
right. Right.
Anything
but what they did. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So before we go, I think we have to go over what it's certainly since the year 2000, in my view, and arguably the biggest trade deadline deal in NBA history. That was in 2004. And the Pistons traded Lindsey Hunter, or as Mace used to say at the Palace of Auburn Hills, Lindsey Hunter, Chucky Atkins, a 2004 first round pick in cash. I'm going to go through a long way to build up to this, because unless you're old school, you won't know what this was. A 2004 first round draft pick in cash to the Celtics. Then Zeljko Rabracia, Bobby Sura.
He's a one-name guy. You don't even need the last name.
Bobby Sura and a first-round pick went to the Hawks. Mike James went to the Pistons. Chris Mills went to the Hawks. Chris Mills had been traded a bunch of times by then. As a part of all of this maneuver, and it took Danny Ainge to get into it to make it happen, for which Danny Ainge was vilified by his peers for this move. All of that machinations to deliver Rasheed Wallace from Atlanta to the Pistons. I think Sheed played 1 or 2 games with the Hawks, and they flopped him on deadline day.
I'm pretty sure it was 1.
Yeah. They traded for him from Portland, and then the Hawks turned around and traded him again. Sheed to the Pistons, which without question changed the direction of that NBA season. After Sheed went to the Pistons and joined up with Chauncey Billups and Rip Hamilton and Ben Wallace and Tayshaun Prince, you couldn't score on Detroit. They were granted, this was a terrible era of basketball where nobody could shoot, and it was hand-to-hand combat on the perimeter.
They were playing 65-60 games a lot.
The Pistons were routinely holding teams under 70 points.
Ugh.
It was happening all of the time. And they went on, and the Lakers thought the Lakers had just had their three-peat ended the year before by the Spurs, and the Lakers were loaded for bear. They had Kobe, they had Shaq, their last run together.
Karl Malone.
They had Karl Malone. They had Gary Payton. And they got beat 4-1 by this monster of a Pistons team that was created, that was super. They were good. They may have even won the East, but with Rasheed, they became a monster. And then, of course, went to the finals the next year and lost in 7 to the Spurs. And actually, I think just kicked off a run where they made the conference finals 6 consecutive years.
6 years in a row.
They only won 1 title. But this is the type of deadline deal that you're always dreaming about if you're a contender, that big piece. And this one came on a scramble on deadline day. In terms of deadline day moves, I would argue certainly the best of the last 25 years, maybe the best ever. So, all right. Thanks for watching the Hoop Collective short here. You can listen to our podcast twice a week, wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.